Thank you, Bruce, and good morning, everyone. I'm Trudy Cox, the host of Inside the Newport Mansions with Lark Mason. We're very fortunate to have Lark with us today because Lark is an expert in Chinese art and antiquities. He has appeared on PBS's Antiques Roadshow since its inception in 1996. He is the author of Asian Art, which was published in 2003, and the translator of Wang Shixiang's Connoisseurship of Chinese Furniture. I'm sure I pronounced that a little bit off, but you can correct me later. Lark is the president of the Appraisers Association of America, was from 2019 to 2021, and for nearly 25 years was a senior officer, generalist, and expert in Chinese works of art with Sotheby's in New York. He was chairman of Asia Week, New York from 2016 to 2017. And if that is not enough, he is the founder of iGavel Auctions, which is an online auction platform. He is with Lark Mason Associates, a full-service auction house, and Lark Mason Art Advisory. In addition, Lark is a very good friend of the Preservation Society. He serves as a trustee of our organization, the Preservation Society of Newport County, and he's an invaluable member of our collections committee. So Lark will be here on July 17th. He will be presenting a lecture entitled Discovering America's Treasures. It will be at Rosecliff starting at 6 o'clock. And if you have not signed up yet, you can by going to our website, newportmansions.org. And we hope that everybody listening will find some time to join us on July 17th. So long introduction for a very prestigious man. Welcome, Lark. And let's start out with a very broad question, and that is, give us an idea, if you will, of how you, an expert, how do you define the word treasure?
How do I define treasure? You know, that's the best question to ask because we all do it differently, right? So we'll have literally thousands of people come with thousands and thousands of objects to any given roadshow. And what they come with ranges from items of great value, where the principal consideration is, what is this? Who is it by? Who created it? What is the value today? And then there are people that come with things that from a monetary standpoint have modest value, but emotional content is huge. Let's say that you have one item that was left to you by your grandmother, and she left it and she had a little note to my darling grandchild. And that's all you have, but she didn't tell you why she left it. And you've been puzzled. And that becomes something that is a treasure for you emotionally, but it's also a mystery. So we have a lot of people who come with items like that. And that's where we put on our detective hat and try to go back and ask questions and pull from that object information that will elucidate for the owner what the grandmother was thinking. And that's something that I think is the most rewarding of this whole process.
Yeah, there's a really strong emotional tie to this story. I think you must have some great stories, Lark, about unsuspecting owners of treasures, people who thought that the painting that they have had hanging in their house was nothing but Granny's. We have it there because it was Granny's, and then they find out that it's really something worthwhile. Can you share some of your favorite stories with us?
Oh, absolutely. And I love it that I'm getting these all completely impromptu. So you're making me stay on my toes, which is good. So back many, many years ago on the Antiques Roadshow, we were in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And a woman came up to our table with a wagon pulling, it's kind of a wagon with something wrapped in a towel. And none of us knew what it was. And I went over to it and I unwrapped it, and it was this slowly emerging was this white marble animal, and it was a lion. And as I'm uncovering this and then picking it up out of the wagon, I realize how heavy it is. And I'm looking at this and I'm completely shocked because it became apparent to me as I'm unraveling the towel from the heavy object, which weighed about 50 or 60 pounds, that it appeared to be from the 8th century. And it was a Chinese marble lion, which I later found they were using as a doorstop. And that ended up, the process that we go through is when we find something from someone that comes to us like this lion, we immediately call our producer, and the producer comes and then speaks with the owner and talks to me or whoever the specialist is and tries to figure out, is this going to be something that has, it's going to be great for television. That'd be great to share with other people. People can relate to it. And this was, I was so excited because when do you have a 8th century Chinese marble lion that's, 12 inches tall come to you at the Antiques Roadshow? It doesn't happen very often. That's the only time. So I was obviously interested in it. And then the producer determined that the owner had no idea. And we went immediately to camera. And what transpired.
Wow, right to camera. You were going
right to camera. They did not wait.
Her.
No, they could tell that, we were both very emotional. But what they didn't realize with me is my emotion was partially about discovering this fabulous object so quickly. But it was also because my dad had just died. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, wouldn't he have loved to have seen this?
Oh.
And so that's where those hidden emotions come into the roadshow. We don't know that as the viewer.
Right.
But as the people handling it, whether it's something that was gifted to you from an ancestor or some other occurrence is going on at the side and you just don't know, all of those come into play. And that's what makes it so gripping and exciting. And truly the very first reality show on television.
Yeah, good point.
We're not professionals. We are not just normal people who have a passion, as I do, and my colleagues, for objects, the history, everything that surrounded these, the beauty of what we see, and getting to share that enthusiasm with other people is what we want to do.
Wow. How did she react? And what was the value, would you guess?
Oh, I'm going to give you the wrong number, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. And she was extraordinarily surprised, and I was all teary. And, the whole thing has been viewed, I don't even know how many millions of times online. But it's one of those classic roadshow moments. Right. Where everyone is just surprised and the emotion is high and the object happened to be great.
Lark, I suspect you don't know what happens afterwards, but do you find that many people who find out that they are in possession of something very valuable make the decision that actually this is so important to me for family reasons that even though there's an economic value to this, I'm just going to keep it and enjoy it myself? Absolutely. And people do, because there are three components that I teach courses in art, auctions, markets, and I've done for a number of years, for a long time at New York University and then other locations. So one of the components of value is that emotional content. You'll see in an auction sales room, people would be raising their hands and going way beyond what they expected to pay because they've already decided that would look great in this room, or that belonged to someone famous that I really admire, or I just love those colors. So there, we have all different kinds of triggers for our emotions. That's one component. The other is the practicality of the item. Maybe I really need that object. As in the case of the mansions, just think what we do when we have something that was originally in the location and we see it coming up for sale and we have an opportunity to put it back in its original home. Right. We're going to be far more interested in buying that than someone who's buying would be motivated to just have it match the curtains. Yeah. And the last component is the intrinsic value of the item,
or the market value. You know, if it's silver, diamonds, whatever it happens to be, gold, obviously that's a component. But also if it's something that is just extraordinarily desirable at this moment in the market, all those are considerations that people weigh before they raise their hand or open the wallet.
Yeah, yeah. You know, one of the things I've always wondered about, it is very common here, is the desirability of objects and how that can change over time. And a good example is, you know, brown furniture is now no longer in vogue. But could you talk a little bit about how that change occurs, and why does it occur? Why does something that was once very valuable become less valuable? Why does something that wasn't worth a thing all of a sudden become very rich in purpose? How does that happen?
I'm going to give you, here's a good example. During, prior to World War II, if you did a survey of all the Americans in the United States, all of us, and said, how many of you had traveled abroad, the percentage would have been extraordinarily small. There was no reason. People were focused on their careers, their lives, wherever their hometown happened to be. You would have had a very small percentage. If you did that same survey in 1960, you would have had everything that occurred during World War II, when you had a whole entire generation or several generations of young men and women sent abroad. Then in the Reconstruction era efforts, not just going to one location in Europe, but they were in Europe, they were in Africa, they were in Asia, they were all over. And they were there not just because of the conflict, but afterwards they were there part of that generous spirit of Americans, the reconstruction that was taking place, the investment that was taking place, the expansion of industry. And guess what they did when they came home?
Yeah.
They wanted things surrounding them that reflected this extraordinary period of their lives. And so they collected. And they collected English furniture, they collected Georgian silver, they collected Chinese works of art, they collected Japanese works of art and prints and all kinds of things. And they made donations to institutions, and they made some of the biggest donations that you could ever imagine. And part of that actually is the reason that the mansions exist in Newport as the Preservation Society, because of that enthusiastic support for the past. So when you have that occur, and then that generation is followed by the boomer generation, who still has a little bit of that connection because we valued our parents' opinions and what they collected, and it means something emotionally to us. But our children are disconnected, and their experience largely with life abroad is through screens. It's not the same. It's not a living environment. So we have had a very high level of interest in collecting and looking back to the past, and from the 70s into the 80s, into the mid 90s, and then it started to decline. And it was supplanted by other things that have meaning to a generation that did not have those same experiences as the parents. That's what occurs. And that's the objects haven't changed. They're still fabulous, wonderful, quality, interesting things that are repositories of history, craftsmanship, but how we perceive them's changed.
Is there any way, if you are a collector, is there any way to know whether the thing that you like collecting is on the upward trend or the downward trend, so that you can get out if it looks like, take the emotion away now?
Yep.
Say it's for financial reasons, get out in time to reap all that you expected to from that category of objects. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, and I'd say one of the very simple things is look at who's in that audience of people that are buying. So if most of them have hair that is my color, I'd say that it's probably not a good bet to put your money in that category.
Ah, really? Yeah.
Because I am filtering my appreciation of that object through my age, my lens, which is my eyes, my experiences, which are not the same of my children who are in their
Right.
30s.
So
And-
there are a lot of younger people with money and older people with money too. What are older people in our country collecting now, and what are younger people who have the interest? What are they collecting?
Well, I'd say for the majority of the people who are older, what you're talking about, if you have enough discretionary money, and you're talking about the high end of the market, what are you doing? You're not just kind of trying to decorate your house. You want to try to purchase a masterpiece.
Right.
You want something that's extraordinary. You want something, and you're thinking about your exit strategy. Where does it go? Could it go to Preservation Society in Newport? Would it be, putting it back in its original home? Could it go to another institution? Would this be something that you would set up a private foundation? There are a lot of different kind of motivations that could occur for an older person. But in all likelihood, you're not going to go out and try to accumulate hundreds or thousands of objects that are a lower value, because all you're doing is you're going to burden yourself and your heirs with what do you do when you're no longer there and the next person has to deal with it. So for a younger person, though, what you're doing is exploring and learning and trying to figure out what are these things that interest me, while you also are being practical about it. Do I want an entire wall full of cases holding these small items? Maybe you do. Maybe it's books, rare books, and you interact that way. But maybe it's a different category, in which case you integrate it in your house, or it's just completely separate. I know people who have established, have a separate building that they've created where they keep their collection, and it's kind of the version of their man cave, or whatever, and they have a place for it. So there's different perspectives based on age.
Well, I keep reading that younger people whose decorating style is minimalistic are more prone to be putting their money into contemporary art, contemporary objects. They're not a Gilded Age lamp is not going to be of interest at all. It's current artists and artisans who are attracting their attention. Whereas people my age, it's probably the last thing that, because our houses aren't set up to accommodate that look. Is that, would you say that? What are young people collecting right now?
I think you're absolutely right on target. One of the biggest areas, and when we were at the Roadshow, would be collectibles. And you can see that whether it's in something that's a traditional field that's been around for a while, which would be baseball, memorabilia, and cards. Some of these things are making a huge amount of money because people have been interested in sports for a long time, and they have rivalries with teams. So that makes perfect sense.
Comic books, are they hot?
Comic books, not as much as they were, because generationally, look at who is collecting those things. But when you talk about collectible cards, and we're veering into an area that I am not that knowledgeable in, but in terms of things related to, let's say, Pokemon or the various types of collector cards, things that people grew up with and they enjoyed and they have happy memories. We're talking about emotions again. That's what they're associated. That's what they associate with. And even game consoles, gaming related things that are online, there's strong markets for these. And that are categories that didn't exist in the way that we think of it today. They did exist. Let me just go back in time. I don't know if you've looked at any old films with Rudolph Valentino, but he captivated an entire generation. He was the most famous actor on screen, and people were just collecting. Ask someone today who's 30 something, gosh, are you interested in collecting Rudolph Valentino? They're going to go, who?
Right.
I have no idea.
We have met people here at the Preservation Society who are, I would guess, they are collectors beyond the extreme. People who make it their hobby to collect Gilded Age furniture. And then when they have reached whatever it is that they were trying to reach, they abandon that and go into 20th century German art. And then when they have finished collecting everything that they wanted to in 20th century German art, they get rid of that and move on to, do you see a lot of that? Or is that only very wealthy people who have the ability to do that?
It certainly happens among very wealthy people. The most famous of whom was William Randolph Hearst.
Yeah.
Their houses full of things, and then built San Simeon, which is just this fabulous repository of what he had, which is similar to what we have in the mansions in Newport. It happens to people regardless of their economic status. And I think it's a combination of inquisitiveness, curiosity, wanting to be surrounded by things that they find fascinating and that add value to their life experience.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I was growing up, it was coin collecting. That's kind of, not as strong a hobby as it had been. But it was something that just virtually every kid in my neighborhood had a coin.
What about stamp collecting?
Same story with stamps.
I think that we were all kind of raised to not just collect S&H green stamps, but stamps from every state in America, every country around the world. That if you reached that goal, you were really at your top.
And you learned something.
Yeah.
You learned about the different states, you learned about the different presidents, you had something that you were learning from that process, and it gave you a good feeling. So guess what happened with a lot of those collections? We held on to them as we aged. Typically, we didn't get rid of them. We held on. And so, when I go to handle someone's estate or someone calls me and wants advice, it's not unusual that those childhood kind of interest people keep.
Yeah. Do you, I wonder if this could even be computed, but how much do you think just gets tossed away or given to the Salvation Army?
Vast quantities of items are tossed away, primarily because we are a very wealthy society. So the cost to acquire items that are just everyday kinds of objects often was very low. And these items served a purpose. And depending upon the perspective of the individual, if you're a person that was raised in the Great Depression, whether you had money or had no money, still you were raised then, and it affected you. Tend to be.
And you held on to it.
That's exactly it. You held on to, I might be able to use this. I can't use it for the original function. I don't need an oil lamp. But if I take the fixture out of the top, I could perhaps put flowers in it. Or wouldn't that look cute in my cabin? I'll convert it to a lamp, a different kind of lamp.
Yeah.
We reuse, we recycle, we do. But when that gets brought to a sale venue, then you have to ask yourself, okay, that is the person that created that interest and so on. They had that unique attachment to that item. Who will the next person be, and will that person have that same sort of excitement, interest, or whatever, curiosity? No, they're going to have no association with that item at all because they didn't have it as an oil lamp, and they don't remember sitting in that very flickering flame in their dining room when they sat next to their parents. So the next person doesn't have that. And then you ask yourself, how many of those are around? Huge quantities, because it was principal mean of lighting, which is one of the fundamental things that enabled us to stay up a little later at night. And what did we do at night before television or radio? We entertained ourselves. We
played games
cards,
or read or talked.
We told stories.
Yeah.
We sang, and you were at a piano and played the piano. There were a lot of different activities that took place, and the activities that tend to take place today are often solitary. Think of the games we play on our handheld devices, or we play with somebody else who's not located in the room.
That's right.
Very different kind of environment. So I'm not sure that bodes well for the holding, collecting of tangible objects, particularly those that were really had more of a functional purpose than anything else.
Right.
They
Well,
weren't.
how would you advise though, Lark? I think that maybe some people know that they have to downsize their houses and know that they might have some good things within their house, but haven't got the foggiest idea how to determine whether they've got a treasure on their hands or not. And when you're trying to downsize, there comes a point in time where all of a sudden you're just getting rid of it all because I got to get this out of my house. How would you advise someone who would like to at least know that I know that I'm throwing this away, but even though it is something important or valuable, how do people get up to speed? I'm talking about normal people, not people like you, but just regular normal people. What are things they should be looking for that would say, you know what, this could be important. Don't just toss it yet. Do you understand my question?
I absolutely, I do. And I think the first thing is to try to recognize that the emotional component that exists between you and that object is unique to you. That's something that you need to remove, because what that can do is that can sway you to overvalue something, which then becomes disproportionate and maybe makes you overlook other items that people might value more highly. So the first step is to try to figure out, what do you have? Now, if you have a lot of very modest things and not too many of them, let's say the best way you can do that is simply going online and you can look up similar items and try to find out what a general value for that item would be. If you have something that's more complicated, let's say it's a painting, an oil on canvas, it's a beautiful landscape painting and it's got a signature, you can go and try to do that, but there's a lot of room for error. So you may well be able to find a name that matches that, but doesn't necessarily mean it's the same artist. So the next level is to do.
Can I interrupt here? If you find something and you go online and you found an artist that has a name and you see on eBay or online that, well, his work is going for $1,000, then what do you do? Because if you're just an average citizen, okay, now I got $1,000 painting in my house, but I don't know how to get that money.
Well,
I don't know how to sell it.
I think it depends on whether you want to sell it or if you're just trying to figure it out.
No, I'm talking about getting it out of my house because I've got to downsize.
Okay, so I think before you get there, what you want to do is have a professional come through and give you a value for what is in the house. And there are two ways to do that. You can hire a professional appraiser, and professional appraisers create documents. And in the event of a downsizing, you would want to have what's called a fair market value appraisal, which reflects the market value of the items. That will give you a list. It will provide almost an inventory for you of everything of consequence. So if you decide to sell something, you will know what you have.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's done by an objective person. That's a third party. And so you're going to get a real sense of what the value is. The other way of doing this is if you were in the midst of, I've got to move and downsize and I want to start over with new things, then what I'd recommend is that you check to find either a local auction house or a dealer, someone who is a professional, to come through and make offers. And you can say, I'm interested in selling these things. Could you go through here and give me an offer for what is here? Now, you won't necessarily know what all the items are if you take that approach. So getting a third-party objective professional will minimize the chance that you fall into that trap of, oh, I went online and saw one like it that sold for $500. If I can get $600, I'm doing great. But in fact, it wasn't really worth 600. It's worth 60,000, and you just got the wrong name. Happened to have the same name, but it's the wrong artist, and you made this catastrophic bad choice.
Right.
Those happen all the time, and it's kind of being penny wise, pound foolish.
Wow.
spend the money, get a professional, have them go through, prepare yourself in advance. And then once you know what you have, you can get a house sale professional or someone to come through, sell all of these. They're incentivized to get the most they can for what you have, but it's really up to you to do that initial homework.
And where do you find an appraiser, common man on the street?
There are three major professional appraisal organizations. I was the head of the American Appraisers Association of America, which is called AAA. There is the American Society of Appraisers, ASA, and the International Society of Appraisers. All of us who are members adhere to professional standards, which are called USPAP, which is USPAP, and it stands for the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Certain things that we have to adhere to produce a document, and the type of research that we must do to fulfill our obligations from an ethical and professional standpoint.
Well, that gives people who are listening and are sitting on hopefully a gold mine some advice on how to get started. How did you yourself become interested in Chinese art and antiquities?
I began my career with training by Sotheby's in London, and they had a program that's not the same as the program they have today, but at the time it was really an internship. And the goal was to prepare all of us to have a high level of knowledge about 90% of the categories of items that go through auction. So we didn't delve deeply into coins, we didn't delve deeply into wine, and we didn't delve deeply into certain areas. But for most of the categories, we delved into those quite deeply over the course of a year. And at the end of that year, the people who were, I guess, the top graduates, I was the top American graduate of the year I did the course, ended up, many of them, working in the auction houses as generalist. So I became a generalist and did that across every category from precious paintings to diamonds, and did that for 1979 to 1985, 86. But I continued to maintain that generalist ability all the way up to the present. But after about 6-7 years of traveling a lot, we decided to have children, and Erica and I decided this would be, and I had an itch to become more of a specialist. So I looked at a variety of different areas, and the one that was most appealing to me was Chinese works of art. So I ended up in the Chinese department, and because I had this prior training and then worked professionally with Sotheby's as a generalist working with Chinese art, I began immediately cataloging and working at a fairly high level, and that was the start. And then ended up specializing in Chinese furniture, for which I ended up translating the book that you had mentioned.
Right.
In China, I was given a
So
sabbatical.
you speak? Do you speak Mandarin or?
I did. My Mandarin is terrible. It's dependent upon tone, so it's not very good. But it was good enough when I was much younger that our children, my son Lark the third, is fluent and actually also speaks Japanese and a smattering of Korean, and then can write all of them. So, it's something that we just got very involved in our family. And I actually translated 2 books at one time. I was pretty good at it.
Yeah. So you were.
I look back and I go, gosh, that fellow was very smart.
And so you never lived in China, did you?
I did. I was given a sabbatical to translate this work with Wang Shixiang, who is the top, considered their top scholar, and he was kind of a rock star scholar expert in China. He'd been the head of the Palace Museum, had done a number of notable things, had written a lot of different books across a lot of different categories. So in his sense, the generalist, that he was both a generalist and a specialist. And at the time, I was responsible for Chinese furniture sales, Sotheby's. and set a lot of world records, which today seem like not a record at all because the prices have gone up so astoundingly. But they allowed me, I think I was the second person that had ever had a sabbatical. And I stayed there for 6 months in his 17th century house with wearing gloves in the winter with the tips cut out, where I used my manual typewriter, and he would speak in Chinese English, and I replied in English Chinese back to him, and translated his book, and then I translated another book and from another author, and Connoisseurship of Chinese Furniture, Classic Chinese Furniture of the Qing Dynasty are the two works that I did that came out of that. And it was right at the cusp of all the Tiananmen Square events. So very, very interesting time to be.
Absolutely. Is there something within the Chinese art world or antiquities world that has particularly jumped up in value? And again,
virtually, beginning right around 2003, Chinese economic political policies were were liberalizing, and that enabled a lot of people within China to go off on their own and be entrepreneurial, because the Chinese people are very entrepreneurial. And you can see this from old paintings. You open a scroll painting, one of the most famous paintings in China is this market showing all these little independent business people selling all types of goods. And so that meant that there were lots of items that were created, and they had a big population. So they have started to encourage people to get rich is glorious, became the phrase Deng Xiaoping gave.
Get rich is glorious.
It is. Okay. We agree with that. That's good. Think of us in the mansions when you do, right? And so they created all these fabulous works of art, but they didn't have any money until this liberalized policy put in effect. And then guess what they wanted to buy? They wanted to buy back things that meant something to them. They had an emotional connection they could see in their living room, and then they wanted houses that were bigger. So they started spending money to build houses, and that housing market started to grow. And people then wanted to get into cars because the market had grown, and you couldn't live close in the city center. You had to live further away, and your business didn't have to be next door. It could be somewhere else. And guess what you have then? You have one car, then you have a couple of cars, and your kids are going to a nice school, and you have a second home, and you're filling this up with something that means something to you, Chinese works of art. So the market rocketed upward, because prior to that, the market was completely dependent upon Americans, Europeans. With a very small percentage of buyers in Hong Kong, Singapore, and some in Japan that drove the market. This is what we're talking about in the 80s, all the way up through most of the 90s. And beginning in 2003, you get this other component, and that continued to be robust until there were policies put in place that restricted that kind of growth. And after about 2013, 14, 15, and then we see a downturn. So right now, the market has dropped from that peak of around 2015, 16, with the exception of some things at the very highest end of the market. It's very interesting. Art is not just something that you look at, it also involves economics, and that also involves incentives.
Yeah.
Incentives, they're going to do a variety of things with their money.
Can you comment on the Preservation Society has a small collection of Chinese art, artifacts, objects. I'm thinking in particular of the Chinese lacquer panels in the Elms breakfast room. Can you comment on those panels and tell our listeners whether we tell the world they are special, and maybe they're not.
No, they are special. They absolutely are special. And I was in the room when we had a dinner in the Elms, right? And before the dinner, I was spending a fair amount of time in that room looking at those lacquer panels, which actually I presented a paper at the Minneapolis Institute of Art many years ago when they at the inaugural opening of their museum, and it was on Chinese lacquer and how to date it, because it's notoriously difficult. And the panels are difficult
Right.
because they are taken away from the original setting.
Right,
So,
yeah.
so the question is, for those, are they 17th century, which 17th, early 18th, and I'm trying to recall them exactly, but I think there's a good chance they are. And they were removed likely from a very large screen or series of screens, which
Right.
were the type of presentation screen given in China, an acknowledgement for lifetimes of service for government officials or people involved in the military. And you would put those in the family audience hall, ancestral hall. You'd have your big 12-panel Coromandel screen. And
Well, we were very, very fortunate that when Berwyn was building that house, he got connected to the right person who decided, I think there were an apartment in Paris had been broken up. And here they are now in Newport. And Xavier Solomon, who is with no, I'm sorry, excuse me. The panels are very comparable to what you see at Schönbrunn, which we've been always told panels of that kind were kind of thrown away at some period. There aren't a lot of them around, as I'm taking a long time to say, that they are very unique and that there are not many of them in the world.
exactly. And the reason those came up for sale in China is these were presentation pieces for people of stature, importance, when they were retiring or a birthday, or they had their job, they had ended their term as governor of a province or whatever it is. So it was very personal, and often on the reverse, there'd be these long inscriptions that would talk about who made the donation, who contributed, and so on. So the families, when the family died out, who wants someone else's presentation screen? Nobody in China. So they thought at the time, this is in the late 19th, early 20th century, what a great thing, or even in the 18th century, what a great thing, we can unload these to these crazy Westerners who want to put something that belonged to someone else that's talking about how great they were, because they can't read what it says and they don't care. They just think it's pretty. So the Chinese are perfectly happy to get rid of them.
Right. Well, we are the beneficiaries of that one. And then we've got about 2 minutes left, Lark. We've got a few things at King's Code. Anything that stands out in your mind? He was Chinese, he was a businessman and did a lot of trading. So there may be something.
What astounds me about the collections in Newport is the variety and the quantity of a lot of things that are just kind of ordinary, but things that are stupendously interesting, and many of them of great value, that are tucked away in all of the houses. And I think it's almost like a treasure hunt to go through and look and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I just saw over there on the desk or on the mantelpiece. And I love doing this with our curator, Leslie.
Yeah.
Leslie's great. So,
She is. And Nikki, who did the exhibition on Chinese Americans in Newport, and in doing that exhibition increased her knowledge about collecting, I think, dramatically. So we are lucky to have two people.
People are still talking about what a fabulous exhibition that was.
Yeah.
I can tell you, and the
right. Well, you certainly helped on that too. Well, we cannot wait to I think your presentation on the 17th is going to be just fantastic. I think you could probably talk to us for about 10 hours because there is we haven't heard how you got to be a collector in the first place. And you started out in Atlanta and you started collecting early on. But unfortunately, you'll have to tell the audience on the 17th how it all started.
It's all born of curiosity and having access. And that's what we do at the Preservation Society. We enable the 12-year-old kid that's there with mom and dad to wander through and be in awe and inspired by what they see. And
beautifully said. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you in the middle of July for your lecture at Rosecliff on July 17th. Thank you very, very much, Lark.
Thank you, Trudy. Bye.
Bye.